Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Dr. Soul Brother again with another remedy to help cure your ills. I want to talk to you all briefly about two men who have made a profound impact on our society, our culture, and our people. They are soul brothers, in my view, and their names are Tommie Smith and John Carlos. They are joined at the hip, and I think that needs to be noted. In case anyone out there in the clouds don't know who I'm talking about, we're talking about Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who were first-rate track and field athletes in the 1960s. They're noted for being on the stage, world stage, during the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. Tommy Smith was born June 6, 1944, in Texas, and grew up in California. John Carlos, born June 5th, 1945. Okay, so let me repeat that. Tommy Smith, born I'm sorry, June 6th, 1944, in Texas, raised, finishes growing up in California. And John Carlos, born June 5th, 1945, in Harlem, New York. Now, as fate would have it, they would cross paths with each other in college at University San Jose. At that time, it was San Jose State College. Today is known as San Jose State University in San Jose, California. Um, both Tommy Smith and John Carlos represented their culture and country every time they hit the track. Every time, whether whether they ran at Mount Sac in California or other meets, and certainly during the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. San Jose State is where they were groomed as runners. Their coach at the time was a white man named Bud Winter, uh, and he, as I said, groomed them as runners. While at San Jose State uh, University, Professor, a black man by the name of Professor Harry Edwards, who in his own right was an athlete, um, taught the black students. Well, I shouldn't say it like that. He taught bunch of students, but his main focus was uh, the black students there at San Jose State. So Tommy Smith, John Carlos, Lee Evans, and a host of others were under his tutelage. And this was very important because this is at a time when they were really black folk, that is, were really minorities on predominantly white college campuses. So for you to have a black professor, and not only a black professor, but a black professor who wasn't that much older than you. I mean, I just noted Tommy Smith, born 1944, John Carlos, born 1945, but guess what? Professor Harry Edwards was born 1942. Yeah, so he was 2 and 3 years older than some of those folk. Wasn't that much older than they were. Well, um, there was this feeling of isolation on the campus of San Jose State, as well as in that community. You were not allowed as a black person to join white fraternities. You were there was housing discrimination, all those things. Not to mention, all this is happening against the backdrop of the civil rights movement slash Black Power movement, the overall black movement. So, undoubtedly, um, people like Professor Edwards was able to penetrate, if you will, the mindset of a lot of the black students at the time. So when there was talk of boycotting the '68 Olympic Games, that caught the ears of the black athletes. The thing is, you had mixed feelings about that. You had those who were for boycott, and they boycotted because of the ill treatment of black folks in America and the ill treatment of black athletes. and felt that black athletes were being used and all the rest of it. So there were feelings of, well, yeah, we need to boycott that. I remember black athletes like Lou Alcindor, who later became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You know, he was at UCLA playing basketball. He chose to boycott the Olympics in 1968. And by the way, Lou Alcindor, aka Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, was a homeboy of John Carlos. They knew each other growing up. They both come out the same neighborhood. Okay, so they were homeboys. Only difference is, um, one came out to California to go to UCLA. The other one, John Carlos, went to college in Texas for a minute. Then he transferred because he got recruited to San Jose State. Well, let me move on. Um, the black athletes worked in concert with Professor Edwards on what was known as the Olympic Project for Human Rights. And believe it or not, people like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood in solidarity with those brothers who were wanted to boycott the um, Olympics of 1968. Unfortunately, as you all know, Dr. King lost his life in April 1968. So Dr. King didn't live to see the Olympics jump off. Now, even though there were people who wanted to boycott it, there were those who weren't interested in boycotting. So they decided, okay, we won't boycott the Olympics, but what we will do is show our displeasure with things by wearing black socks or wearing black shoes and things of that sort. Now um, there was a whole thing that was going on in Mexico City with people there. This is at a time when the world was on fire. Okay, things were happening. Mexico City, the different Caribbean islands, Africa, etc. You know, and so people like John Carlos and Tommie Smith decided to take a stand. So I would encourage people to look at what John Carlos and Tommie Smith were doing. I mean, again, there were other athletes, but I'm focused on them because they really um, did something that stood out. That was when they decided to stand on the world stage after receiving their medals, because there was a race where Tommy Smith came in first. A man by the name of Peter Norman, a white man by the name of Peter Norman from Australia, came in second, and John Carlos came in third. What's significant about Peter Norman? Peter Norman was a white fellow, I said, who was from Australia. And even though he was not an American, though he was not a black man, he believed in human rights and felt a need to stand in solidarity with his competitors, which is a very noble thing to do. Very noble. Well, as many of y'all may have seen the photographs or film footage, what ended up happening? During the national anthem, John Carlos and Tommy Smith stood with their heads bowed, fists clenched in the air, with the black gloves and uh, black shirt, black socks, and in some cases, I think one of them had no socks or something, which represented poverty, and they stood in solidarity with their black brothers and sisters here in the U.S. And it was much to the chagrin of many white folks, and including some black folks who were clearly brainwashed, and they ended up paying a price for that. They were shunned in overall society. They couldn't get jobs, and when they did get jobs, it was kind of menial, that type of thing. Um, Tommy Smith was washing cars. Um, John Carlos would be in sales, and then when they discovered who he really was, they cut him loose. All that kind of, mind you, both of these men had wives and families. You know, wives and babies that they were raising. So it was important for that to bring for them to bring some kind of income into the home. And by the way, it needs to be noted that um, John Carlos's wife at the time, Kimmy, was a very pro-black uh, sister who took pride in her heritage, pride in her hair, etc. You look at those pictures. I mean, it's clear. And Tommie Smith's wife, Denise, at the time, had their son. I think his name was Kevin. And she, if you look at the footage, she was sporting a natural. And all. I mean, this is again, this is against the backdrop of Black is Beautiful. Okay, and um, both couples represented Black love, something that we need to really tap back into, in my judgment. But so that's what happened there, and also that was somewhat of a ripple effect what they did because there was a uh what was it? I'm trying to remember the name of the school. Um, uh, there was a student who followed the lead of Black heroes like John Carlos and Tommie Smith. Um, this was a brother who was a member of the Yale University band, raised his fist in the rain during the playing of the national anthem. And this is before the 1968 Columbia versus Yale University game in the Yale Bowl. If anybody could do any research and find out who that brother is, if he's still around or whatnot, let him know Dr. Soul Brother would love to holler at him. You know, because I don't think enough thing has enough has been done, said or done, about those who stood in solidarity with uh, Tommy Smith and John Carlos. I really, I mean, I was again assuming that this man is still alive. That wasn't done. Um, Tommy Smith and John Carlos took a principled stand against institutional racism, and neither one, and we want to be clear, neither one was anti-American or anti-American flag. Let me repeat that. Neither Tommy Smith nor John Carlos were, while they were taking principled stand against institutional racism, neither one of them was anti-American or anti-American flag. Okay, and I stress that because too often when you have folk who look like us, who are Black folk, who have a legitimate gripe as it relates to ill treatment of us in the society, there's a tendency to almost become unhinged, and you start going off into, well, I don't want to be no American. That flag doesn't represent me, and all that kind of stuff. And there was a point when I would say, well, I can understand where you're coming from. However, I'm at a point. I can't speak for the rest of y'all, but I'm at a point. I'm at a point where I have to say, wait, hold up. We got to have some intervention here because what ends up happening, I've discovered on my journey that there's some people who when they say talking about we don't want roots here and this isn't my country, etc. We're not Americans. I've heard that too. In fact, this was even told to me. Well, to those people who think and speak like that, this is my question. Okay, let's go with that for a moment. What are you doing to try to become an American? Well, the answer is real simple. They they don't have an interest in doing that. You know, they want to gripe, want to whine and complain and go into a white accommodation stuff. I know that sounds contradictory, but it's real, and I'll have to address that on another show. But let me move on. I'm going to wrap this up quickly because I don't want to be on here long. But um, both of those men paid heavy price in their lives. It broke up their marriages. In fact, John Carlos's wife at the time, Kimmy, they were separated at the time that she just chose to end her life because of all the pressure. I mean, they had been harassed by the FBI. They had been harassed by, there was an issue with John Carlos not being able to bring money into a home because, the man's responsibility is that of a provider and a protector. And uh, what this society was doing was essentially castrating both John Carlos and Tommy Smith. And, we as Black men have a history of that in America. But I want to say that I have a lot of respect for somebody like Mr. Peter Norman, who stood in solidarity with them when he didn't have to, similar to those whites who stood in solidarity with us here, whether they were Jewish or WASP, when they didn't have to, and in some cases paid with their own blood. Okay. So I have to salute Mr. Peter Norman for that. Unfortunately, Mr. Peter Norman died some years ago of a heart attack in Australia. And Tommie Smith and John Carlos felt it was their duty not only to attend the service, but participate as pallbearers. So that's great. That's important. And that's why it's fitting when you see the photograph with Tommie Smith and John Carlos on the stage, literally on the world stage with their fists clenched, and you see Peter Norman there. Because he stood in solidarity when he didn't have to. Um, in closing, I want to bring this up. Tommie Smith was asked in an interview back then if he was proud to be an American. And this was his response. Quote, I'm proud to be a black American. End of quote. Okay. And I raise that because there's some people in our community walking around who want to reject being referred to as a black American or an African American or just an American. So when you reject you being a black American or an Afro American, African American, that goes beyond you being PO'd over the ills of society as a result of institutional racism. That goes way beyond that. No, you yourself are going to need some intervention. But again, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole too deep. I'm going to resist the urge because that's going to be a show for another day. Very, very soon. It needs to be dealt with. And when you think about that, just let that marinate. Think about the song. I think you all might have heard me say this before, but think about the song by Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions that was done in 1968. This is my country. I'm not going to go into lyrical content, but I would encourage y'all under the sound of my voice to go to YouTube or Google the lyrical content and study that. 'Cause that's important. Um, and we need to have a conversation about black folk participating in the Olympics. Is this something that we should do? And if so, why? And if it's not, why not? Okay, that's going to be another show. But let's be clear. While Tommie Smith and John Carter, if you talk to either one of them, and I've met both of them, but if you talk to either one of them or both, as sure as I'm sitting here talking to you, they will tell you that they are not anti-American. You can be critical of America and not be anti-American, just like you have people who are critical of the societies that they come from outside of these borders. Like people who may be critical of Haiti, people may be critical of Jamaica, they may be critical of Trinidad, they may be critical of Ghana, they may be critical of Nigeria, et cetera, et cetera. But they're not anti those societies. Even those who fled and moved to the US, have moved to certain parts of Europe, moved to Canada, etc. And if I'm lying, check me. So with that, I'm gonna end it. Remember that John Carlos' birthday is June 5th, and Tommie Smith's birthday is June 6th. So they are a year and a day apart. And take a page out of their playbook in terms of taking principal positions. And understand this, and they understood this. When you take a principal position as a black person or any person really, but I'm specifically talking about us as a black person in this society, it's not a free ride, and you will get pushback from not only white folks, but you'll even get pushback from some of your own people. So with that, I want to say, hit the subscribe button, hit the comment button. Um, please share my channel with others, and until the next time, God bless.